This is All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. Hey, a quick programming note. The filmed musical Broadway adaptation of The Lost Boys earned 12 Tony nominations, tying it with Schmigadoon for the most nominated show this year. Coming up on the show tomorrow, two of its stars, actor Ali Louis Borsky and LJ Benet, discuss their respective roles as the head of the vampire gang and the wayward teen they seek to break into the fold. Then director Michael Arden and scenic designer Dane Laffrey, longtime collaborators, talk about building the production and its spectacular set. That's coming up in exactly 24 hours from now. Now let's get this hour started with a conversation about the end of The Late Show and the future of late night TV. It has been 1 week since Stephen Colbert signed off of the final episode of The Late Show, closing things out with some help from Paul McCartney, Elvis Costello, and his former band leader, John Baptiste.
You say yes, I say no. You say stop, and I say go, go, go. Whoa, no. You say goodbye, but I say hello. Hello, hi. I don't know why you say goodbye, I say hello.
By now you've heard what led to this controversial finale. CBS's parent company, Paramount, merged with the media company Skydance in 2025. Around the same time, CBS announced that The Late Show would not be renewed after Colbert's contract expired in 2026 and explained it as a quote-unquote purely financial decision. Of course, many people saw the move as an effort to appease President Trump because the merger required FCC approval, and Colbert was a frequent critic of the president. As of last Thursday, Colbert is no longer the host of The Late Night Show, and The Late Show itself no longer exists. Joining me now is James Poniewozik, the New York Times TV critic. He joins me to talk about the end of The Late Show and the future of late night. Hey, James.
Hey, thanks, Allison.
Hey, listeners, did you watch the final episode of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert? What did you think about how he used the time? What are your thoughts on the end of The Late Show? And what does this mean for late night? Give us a call, or you can text us at this number, 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. Okay, James, you've had a week, 7 days to sit down and think about how Colbert ended his show. What did you think of the final episode?
A thing that I really liked about it is that, may have not had the most memorable monologue on the show ever or the most memorable interviews or whatever, but I liked how it leaned into the sort of weird, absurdist side of his comedy, while also addressing the elephant in the room about his scandal. And so in its own way, it felt, I mean this in a complimentary way, sort of more like watching the final episode of a kind of, offbeat sitcom or comedy show, as much as a talk show. Meaning, there was this whole scripted bit about a hole in the space-time continuum opening on the set to swallow The Late Show that was created by the logical impossibility of CBS canceling the most popular show in late night. And it was, weird in a way that it was, and I keep emphasizing the weirdness because I think, we talk a lot about Stephen Colbert as a political satirist and comic, which he is. He also has always been an improv comic with kind of an experimentalist, surrealist bent that, in a way, I think he sometimes didn't get to indulge as much on the CBS Late Show because, he was sort of responding to this political emergency in America and, really leaning again into the politics of it. But, here he kind of enlisted that in the service of a theme and a really, I thought, like kind of touching way of just metaphorically dealing with the ends of things, which has often been a theme in his comedy and the more serious aspects of his show. And, like he talked at last year's Emmy Awards about how, he thought that he was going to make a late night comedy show about love, and it ended up being a late night comedy show for various reasons about loss. And he ended up making a finale about loss in a way that I thought was, pretty effective.
It's been interesting. He's known for almost a year that the show is going to end.
Yeah.
What was interesting to you about the way he chose to use his last few weeks?
I don't think it was surprising necessarily, but I thought it was notable that he didn't really go, scorched earth either on the Trump administration or on CBS for canceling his show and the questionable circumstances around it. Partly because I think he didn't need to. Obviously, this was the subtext of the show for a year at this point. And also, I think because I think he wanted the ending of this thing that he'd worked on to mean something more, and again, to repeat myself a little bit, that felt sort of foreshadowed by his remarks at the Emmys last year, which he closed, if I'm remembering correctly, with a paraphrase of "Let's Go Crazy" by Prince, where said, "If the elevator tries to bring you down, go crazy and punch a higher floor." And I think this was kind of his effort to, like be sort of joyously defiant. And I think a lot of the kind of harsher attacks over the last few weeks of his show were sort of left to a lot of the guests wishing him off. I believe it was Bruce Springsteen who said he was the first guy to lose his show because the president doesn't have a sense of humor, or something like that sort of thing.
David Letterman was one of his final guests, and Letterman came over and did The Late Show. It started in 1993 after being on NBC for a while, and he said this.
As we all understand, you can take a man's show, you can't take a man's voice. So that's the good news in this.
What was the impact of that statement, coming especially from David Letterman?
I mean, David Letterman, for one, is the all-time great of late night in many people's minds, and certainly probably in mine. I think him giving Stephen Colbert his endorsement by handing off the show to him was, quite a statement at the time. And I think that, his backing him up at his ending said something because, David Letterman, for one thing, he's not only become this sort of grand old statesman of TV and late night TV, he is somebody who knew a thing or two about, losing shows, having famously lost The Tonight Show to Jay Leno, and about going to war with one's own corporations and bosses. He kind of set the blueprint for that, and we kind of called back to that when he and Colbert resurrected an old David Letterman bit and threw objects off the top of the building onto a copy of the CBS I logo. To me, David Letterman understood that there is always an element of rebellion to comedy. It doesn't necessarily have to be political, although it can be. It doesn't necessarily have to be corporate, although it can be. But, comedy is an irritant that rubs against, that pushes against something. I think that was, sort of a compliment for Stephen Colbert to have made a loud enough noise that you could imagine somebody wanting to silence it, and that it was a notable silence once he left the air.
I'm speaking to New York Times chief TV critic James Poniewozik about the end of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Today is a 1-week mark of its final episode, and we're taking your calls, or you can call our text at WNYC to weigh in on Colbert and late night. Did you watch his show? What are your hopes or fears for the future of late night? Our number is 212-433-9692, 212-433-WNYC. Let's talk to Vladimir, who's calling from West Orange. Hey, Vladimir, thank you for taking the time to call all of it. You're on the air.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. It's unfortunate, and as the gentleman from New York Times is mentioning, there's always a passing of the torch between the late night show talk show hosts. But what we're seeing today isn't a passing of the torch, but rather a president who is censoring the right for these individuals to have a show, for the FCC to become involved in something that has historically been an American tradition, political satire, comedy, late night comedy, is just it's part of what makes our society mesh together with differing opinions of Republican, Democrat, right and left. It's never been the responsibility of the president to become so involved that he has the power to oversee and shut down a show. And that's essentially what we're seeing today, right? Stephen Colbert, he was a funny guy. And whether you liked him or not, it's not so much that he's leaving, but it's the fact that the FCC has become involved, and it's the power that we're seeing today.
Thank you. I'm gonna dive in there because I do want to get to Jim in Brick Township, New Jersey, who's got a similar perspective, or sort of a dovetailing perspective. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a bad, sad day for the United States, just in the overarching picture of how CBS has been eviscerated. It's no longer the news agency it once was. They put in Barry Weiss, and there's just been, she's not even a journalist, and I would just say the other corporate thing to look at it, was the way it was attempted to cancel or remove Kimmel, but the protest was focused, rightly so, against Disney. But as Kimmel joked on the show with when they had the Force 5 and the other comedians came on in the last week, that Paramount is not in the same position. It's to be boycotted, and there's other corporate things the guests can talk about. But this administration is so scarily fascistic leaning and comfortable.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to dive in here because I do want to play that clip from Kimmel. Let's listen.
Late night is in a bit of a weird spot right now, spoiler alert, and people questioning its future. I've been asked this question more like 3 times over the last 10 months in various interviews. They go make a case for late night. I'm like, what do you mean? And they go make a case for it. Why should it continue to exist? I'm like, people like it. I enjoy doing it. But why would you say that make a case for late night?
Well, I would say that I look at the figures, and the fact of the matter is more people are watching late night television now and I know everybody gets crazy, than when Johnny Carson, obviously Johnny Carson had a lot of people watching one show, but we have a lot of shows with 30,000 people watching each one, right? And it adds up. And people watch us on YouTube now, and people have a lot of different options, and yet they keep coming to us. And I will tell you, when I got knocked off the air for a few days, people
press the hi-hat.
People canceled Disney Plus. Why aren't you people canceling Paramount Plus? Because you didn't have it in the first place?
What do you make of Jimmy's comment there?
Yeah, you can talk about the financial troubles of late night and ratings or whatever. The fact is, nobody exerts government influence against a genre of programming that is irrelevant, that doesn't matter. If the president is complaining about a kind of broadcasting and celebrating when it goes off the air, it's hard to say that it has no effect or relevance in our society. And look to the comments, which I totally get. Donald Trump has every right to complain about programming he doesn't like. Comedy. If he wants to be the Stadler and Waldorf of, broadcast television and, tweet his comments on True Social. Past presidents have complained about their coverage, have complained about entertainers, etc. That's one thing. Once you are bringing the powers and pressures of the federal government to bear, whether it's through regulation or through financial leverage, as, it's not just me saying it. Brendan Carr has talked about using the sort of bully pulpit and pressures of the FCC. That's just not healthy for a democracy, for a society. And, yeah, it probably sounds kind of highfalutin to say not healthy for a democracy when you're talking about late night comedy programs. But, it ain't just going to be late night comedy programs if you start going down that road.
Let's talk to Ethan, who's calling from Hollywood. Hey, Ethan, thanks for calling all of it.
Hi, thank you. The thing that I noticed about his last show, and I will commiserate with anybody in their feelings about his being canceled and the political zeitgeist, but he was also so gracious and grateful for the 11 years that he's had, that he and his crew have had, and that did not go unmentioned, and I thought that was really lovely and so intrinsic to his character. And then I heard that he actually wrote this great congratulatory note to Byron Allen saying, congratulations, and he was very, gracious about that. And he said, don't you wish Johnny were here to see this? And I just think all of those things are also part of Colbert's character, and he'll be back. His voice will be back, I'm sure.
Ethan, thanks for calling in. Yeah, for people who don't know, CBS has leased this time slot to Byron Allen. And for people who don't remember Byron Allen, will you explain who he is and what this leasing is about?
Byron Allen is a comic comedian slash, more importantly, entrepreneur who has created this, gold mine franchise of stand-up comedy shows that I want to make sure I'm not getting the title wrong, but I believe that this one, Comics Unleashed, he has an arrangement with CBS to take over the time slot that was previously occupied by The Late Show. And, it's been like great for him, kudos to him for his, it's really like mind-boggling financial success that he's had in creating this franchise. Certainly got nothing against, comedians, comedy specials or whatever. But I do think to that point, we've been talking about what does it mean that, Colbert in particular has gone off the air, or that, the Late Show, it's also important to remember, I think one sort of unsettling thing about this is that it's not like, when NBC kicked Conan off the Tonight Show and gave it back to Jay Leno, or somebody retires and somebody else takes over, somebody's pushed out. It's just the Late Show went off the air and there was nothing in its place, which is to say nothing, not another late night show. One of these sort of like great and one of the few remaining kind of mass media gathering places that serve a lot of audiences and interests, is just gone. And you can, talk about it as business and talk about the ratings and the evolution of TV or whatever. But it's just a loss. I just think as, TV and CBS is just kind of a little less after this. Again, no offense to Byron Allen.
Well, Byron Allen told NPR that for his ethos for Comics Unleashed has always been, quote, don't do anything political. Do you think that'll work?
Well, financially, if it's got lower overhead, it will not necessarily need to do as well in the ratings to work. So, it's like, what is work? Will it be funny? Maybe. Will, people talk about it the next morning? Probably not too much. Will CBS net out better financially than they would have producing an expensive late show? Maybe. But I think the important question is that sort of decision, just stay out of politics stuff, kind of the smarter the smarter television ratings business decision. And for a lot of TV history, it was, traditionally we would have, Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, they made jokes about politics on their shows, but their thing was, we're equal opportunity offenders. We give it to both sides, et cetera. They didn't have political points of view like Stephen Colbert did. And if you were judging by the standards of TV back in that day, you would have assumed that Stephen Colbert would have spent the last decade just getting whipped in the ratings by Jimmy Fallon, who is much less pointedly political and much more trying to be for everybody. But, I cannot overemphasize that for most of his run, he has been both the most political and the most popular show on broadcast TV. So, will Comics Unleashed do well? It might do gangbusters. I don't think that would necessarily be because it tries to avoid any kinds of political comedy.
Let's talk to Artie, who's calling from Queens. Hey, Artie, thanks for holding. You're on the air.
Thank you very much for taking my call. Good afternoon to you both. I think when you said weirdness earlier, because I did see Stephen's last show, to an extent, Ernie Kovacs was considered weird so much. Yeah. And my feeling is that I hope television does not become from Johnny Carson and Jack Parr and all the others and Saturday Night Live we're forgetting, because I can remember Charlton Heston reading a letter that someone sent criticizing Saturday Night Live, and he admitted, I wrote this letter. And I'm saying to go from all of that to Jesse Waters, who is not a comedian, and to go to, which it may do all right, but no, I do not think Byron Allen's show is going to be gangbusters, because it's comics setting up comics with plain, how the wife left me, the kids and the dog and that type of thing. Right. Thank you, good night. So, I hope it doesn't become a wasteland. I hope it still has a bite to it, is really all I wanted to say. And Colbert, I wish him the best of luck.
Thank you so much for calling in. Colbert, he went on the day after the show, he went on local public television in Monroe, Michigan. Did you catch any of his performance?
Oh, I absolutely, because if I can share a little known fact with you that I didn't really write about in my New York Times stuff because it seemed too personally indulgent. I'm from Monroe, Michigan.
Are you really? That's
I
funny.
am from Monroe, Michigan, and so when he first did this, little under the radar practice late show from Monroe, Michigan on public access in 2015. And then when he comes back after he gets canceled and does it the next day, this is the most uncanny experience of my life. Watching this, it's like, some sort of weird dream you have when you've been, you've stayed up too late and been working too much and your work comes to your hometown for some reason. So I can say all the stuff about, the old tradition of muskrat eating, is true. Although very limited. I've never had muskrat. But it was just, it was brilliant. In some ways, I kind of thought, hometown bias aside, that it was, kind of a pure expression of his offbeat comedy sensibility than you can really do on a mass media broadcast network show. And it makes me look forward to whatever it is that he ends up doing next. In addition to the fact that, it was really something to see Stephen Colbert and Jack White taste testing the chili dogs of my childhood.
That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's so interesting. I mean, what do you think Colbert is going to do next? He's going to become one of the video podcast, but it's really a talk show kind of hosts, or what do you expect from him? What would you like to see him do?
I think that would be, a good bet. I know that next he is writing another Lord of the Rings movie for Peter Jackson, which, if you know anything about Stephen Colbert, he is actually, one of the world's biggest J.R.R. Tolkien obsessives, speaks Elvish, really knows his stuff around that. So, there is that. I would not at all be surprised to see him in that kind of podcast space, number one, because, it's very hot right now. Jon Stewart has transitioned well to that. I think that in this media environment, if he wants to do another talk show after, 2 odd decades of doing this, he'd probably much rather be in a setting, and he has the stature to do it, where he is more wholly in control. But I also feel, I'm somebody who watched him in, Strangers with Candy on Comedy Central back in the 90s. I'd love to see him have a chance to do, some comedy as well. And, you can do that and run a talk show.
You can do both stuff.
So, yeah, you can multitask.
When we're talking about late night, last question, which threat is more real, the political threat or the financial threat or the viewership threat?
You mean to the talk genre in general? Night. Yeah, I think the political threat could come and go. The business decline is something that's been going on for years and years and years, and that's going to continue. It is true, however dubious you are of the convenient timing of CBS's announcement, that these are expensive shows that don't pull in the kind of money that they used to because of media fragmentation and changes in the business. So, they got to figure out, some way to do that. As far as viewership is concerned, there are still viewers and listeners for this kind of genre. Like you said, they're listening to and watching podcasts. They're on streaming. They're on, basic cable. There is Jimmy Kimmel, I think, made a very good point that if you're looking at the aggregate audience for this kind of stuff, there's a lot, and there's a lot of interest. There is still just a lot of media out there that's just, people talking to other people and being funny about it, or whatever. It's just possible that, now that we're no longer in the era of just 3 major broadcast networks owning everything, you can't go back to Johnny Carson's Tonight Show anymore.
Chief TV critic for the New York Times and the pride of Monroe, Michigan, James Poniewozik. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Ellison.